Hello, and welcome to the August 2021 Pre-Hospital Care Research Forum Educational Research Journal Club podcast. The PCRF is dedicated to the promotion, education, and dissemination of pre-hospital research. We believe that it is the responsibility of emergency medical professionals worldwide to build a body of evidence to examine pre-hospital emergency care. The PCRF promotes research literacy, and we try to advance the science of EMS educational research. Here at the PCRF Journal Club, we take a closer look at some of the latest research in medical education. I'm David Page, and I'm joined by Megan Corey and hopefully Bill Toon, who sometimes comes in a little late, Dr. Ashish Panchal, and Jonathan Powell from the National Registry of EMTs, and we'll have them introduce themselves here shortly. The study we'll be reviewing today is entitled EMS Program Graduates Who Did Not Retest After Initial Attempt on the National Certification Exam. It's published in Pre-Hospital Emergency Care, the official journal, I should say, of the National Association of EMS Educators, of EMS Physicians, of the National Registry, and many other national organizations that are part of our world. Thank you all for joining us. Let's begin, and we want to remind listeners that you can use the chat feature on your screen to type in comments, and there's a question and answer area for questions for the panelists. We'll be monitoring that as we go. This is a friendly environment, and we at least want to start with our principal investigator. So, Jonathan, what made you want to do research in EMS, first of all, and why this particular topic? What caused you to think about this? Embark in this particular topic. And I hope he can. There you are. Who are you anyway? Please introduce yourself, and let's get Dr. Panchal to also introduce himself.
So hello to everyone. My name is Jonathan Powell, and I'm the Commonwealth of Virginia EMS Research Scholar at the National Registry of EMTs. I'm a paramedic, originally from the great state of Alabama, with a history of working in both rural and urban EMS systems, as well as being a former EMS program director. I'm also pursuing a PhD in epidemiology at The Ohio State University as part of the EMS Research Fellowship at the National Registry. So to get more at your specific question, I'm really excited to be here to talk about this research. In my past role as a program director, I've had the privilege of instructing some brilliant students and saw many successes. I've also, unfortunately, seen students with enormous potential to be strong EMS providers not return to the career and skill set that they prepared for after being unsuccessful at their first attempt on the national certification exam. So this topic is both important to me, but also important to the profession. We need, especially now, a strong education system that supports candidate success and contributes to the stability of our workforce. So with that, I'll let Ash introduce himself and talk a little bit.
Wow, Jonathan, that's quite an act to follow, so thanks for that. My name is Ashish Panchal. I'm a professor of emergency medicine at The Ohio State University. I am an EMS physician, being board certified in EMS as well as emergency medicine. I'm a medical director, and on my day job, of course, is to be the research and fellowship director for the National Registry, where I have amazing research scholars and fellows like Jonathan, where we get to do amazing, exciting research on EMS. And so our thought threads go all across the area, from educational research, clinical outcomes, to really even thinking about examinations and how we can improve our whole culture of research. Oh, I guess I have to respond to why we want to do this research. So I'm an educator by training. So not only do I do EMS education, I do graduate medical education. And for me, one of the biggest things is how can we get our students to be successful? And so this is my area of what my career goal and aspiration is. So this is something that I will continue doing for a long time yet to come.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And I love that you're such a collaborative type of person. You just really empower people in our profession to do research. And I think that is absolutely necessary. And I just want to give a shout out to the National Registry's fellowship program, which you direct, and say that there's open positions for fellows. So, you know, shameless plug as we get started. We'll make it later too, but you know, great researchers like Tony Fernandez and Remley Crow have come from this program, and they contribute so much to our profession that it's just, I think it's one of the you know, crown jewels in sort of our EMS research armamentarium, if you will, to mix metaphors. But great to have you. So wonderful. Well, let me just frame this in that I think there's a lot of people on this podcast who struggle to have their students pass the exam, number one. And number two, we have a workforce shortage. At Pinnacle just recently, they called it a crisis. I'm not going to over exaggerate the situation. I'll just tell you that at Alina, where I work as a paramedic, the last number I heard was 43 paramedics short. North Memorial, which is next to us, 60 paramedics short. And so we're scrambling. I can tell you on the street, we're just one after the other. So we're this concept of finding where the barriers are. You know, there's little information on hard numbers on workforce, but these small barriers like passing the test, and then what happens to the people who didn't pass are critical. So if Jonathan, you want to take it, give us a frame of what this project was all about. How did you do it? Your methods and the population that you studied, and we will then be able to enter into results and discussion. So take it away.
Absolutely, thank you. So again, this paper is titled EMS Program Graduates Who Did Not Retest After Initial Attempt on the National Certification Exam. So essentially what we want to find is what's going on with the population of EMS program graduates. They have graduated an educational program, but they either don't come back to work in this program. So our objective was to understand the population of EMS program graduates that do not return for an additional attempt at the National Certification Examination after an initial unsuccessful attempt. We hypothesized that this population is associated with their demographic and test-related characteristics. So to ask, how did we do this? Well, we leveraged the National EMS Certification Database for EMT and paramedic candidates who completed their training in 2016 and analyzed their subsequent 2-year test and attempt window up to 2018. This data included demographic information about candidates, test characteristics, and examination results. We excluded those who completed their training in the military, were not aged 18 to 85, and did not attempt an NREMT, EMT, or paramedic cognitive exam. We also excluded those who took a refresher or second course before their first attempt. Our measures included age, self-reported sex, NASEMSO region of program residence, time from course completion to initial examination, and examination length. We calculated descriptive statistics and performed modeling to determine the odds of retesting for EMT and paramedic graduates while adjusting for these measures. So Dave, would you like to discuss our methods, our introduction before we get into our results? I'm happy to go in either direction.
Oh, please keep going. I think we're always interested. So can anyone just use National Registry data to do research? I mean, can we just make a request? Is that something that budding researchers that might be on this podcast can just call the registry up?
That's a really good question. We have an email address, research@nremt.org, where you can reach out if you have any desires to work with the registry, in terms of partnering, to work in the registry in terms of requesting access to this type of data. Requesting data does have a process attached to it where you will need to submit a CV, your proposal. That includes detailed methods of what you plan to do with that data. That application then goes to the research committee and gets decided on using a style similar to NIH grants. So absolutely, we love to work with people, we love to work with researchers, but we do have a bit of a structure that gets applied to everyone who comes to us.
Nice. Okay, good. And just for folks that might not be familiar with, what do you mean by descriptive statistics? What kind of numbers did you have to crunch, or did you want to crunch? And sometimes we think of PICO, you know, in terms of population and comparison, what the intervention is, what the comparison is. So if it's the population is people who took the registry exam, and the intervention is, you know, how many, you know, failed, and then maybe the comparison here is the group that didn't have to retake, or the group that never retook versus the one that did. Is that kind of a similar comparison that you were doing, or is it just kind of overall more of a description of those people who never retook?
Certainly. So we took the population of people who were unsuccessful on their initial exam. That is our source population. We then divided that up into those that came back to take another exam, their second exam, and those that did not return for that second examination. And so we compared in our demographics chart, we looked at frequency, so numbers. We also looked at proportions of these providers. So we wanted to look and compare those that did retest versus those that didn't retest, so that we could find associations that are connected with the decision not to retest, that then can allow educators to determine how they can best support those at-risk populations.
I love this, and I'm really glad that you looked at both EMT and paramedic, because I think and we have Michael Caduce as part of our panel team today, because he's running the EMT program out of UCLA, and we see a lot of people who just take EMT classes for the heck of it, and they might take the test and they don't really care about the certification that much. They're going to go on to medical school. Maybe they're doing some other allied health piece, and if they don't pass it, maybe they just don't take it. But taking a paramedic class and then just basically, if I didn't pass, I never try it again, seems like a pretty big commitment. And I was happy to see your description here. I think when I deal with international folks, they don't really understand what is the National Registry, how many questions is this, what does the training typically entail? So thousands of hours of training, and then, you know, what do you have to show for it? Zero. I just, you know, I have lots of knowledge, but I just didn't continue. So in the spirit of success, I think understanding that demographic is amazing. So, all right, let's keep going, because I'm sure people want to know, but what was the answer? What's a punchline? So let's keep going.
Certainly. So let's go to our next slide. So what were our results? First, we had to get to that population that we were just talking about. So 22,088 EMT graduates were unsuccessful on their first attempt of the National Certification Examination. Of these, 33% did not retest. That's 7,208 EMS program graduates who decided to not return. Of these statistics, so if you go to the next slide, please. We did see more females not retest compared to males, and the proportions of EMTs who did not retest were similar across NREMT regions. So specifically, these are these descriptive statistics that we found, and you can see how we divided them up into those that did not retest and those that did retest. And these tables are available within the manuscript, so please, if you would like to spend more time with them, they are available. Next slide, please. So when we get into what we did in terms of modeling, we modeled to find the odds of retesting at the EMT level after an unsuccessful attempt. What we found was that differed by age. So those in the age groups 20 to 21 and 22 to 24, those candidates compared to those aged 18 to 19, their odds increased. So they were testing more often after not being successful on their initial attempt. Now, odds of retesting decreased for female graduates compared to male graduates. Graduates with a minimum test length also had lower odds of retesting than those with a mid-test length. We also saw a drastic stepwise decrease in odds of retesting as time from course completion to your initial examination increased. Next slide, please. Again, we did the same thing with paramedic graduates. You'll notice the numbers are very different here. 2,755 paramedic graduates were unsuccessful on their first exam attempt. Of these, 14% did not retest, totaling 390 graduates. Similar to EMT, more females did not retest compared to males, but we did see an increase in paramedics not retesting in the South NREMT region. Again, this entire table is available within the paper if you would like to spend more time with it. Next slide, please. Similar to EMT, when we look at the odds of retesting at the paramedic level, we saw that it decreased for those who experienced the minimum examination length compared to the mid-length, and for those with an increased time between course completion and their initial examination. Differing from the EMT population, age and sex were not found to be a significant contributor to the odds of retesting for paramedic graduates. I will mention something additional as well. In our EMT analysis, we did see an interaction between our variables of age and our variables of sex. Whenever we put those two together and combined them as an interaction term, we did see that there were differences in a decreased odds of retesting in our entire female population, regardless of age, and in our male population, age 30 and older. We reported the main effects model within this piece, and the appendix has this additional model. Next slide, please. So what were our conclusions? Well, many EMTs and paramedics were unsuccessful on the national certification exam, and they did not come back to retest. These factors that were associated with this included age, sex, length of initial examination, and time from course completion to the initial examination. These characteristics may present actionable items for EMS educational programs and EMS stakeholders to support EMT and paramedic graduates at risk of not entering the workforce. So we also had some limitations that I want to make sure that we get out there before we get into our discussion. One, we were unable to account for graduate socioeconomic status, the qualification of the associated instructors, and environmental factors that could confound our results. We're also unable to account for those who directly obtain state licensure without national EMS certification. This also looks at those who graduated in 2016, which may limit applicability to other years of graduation. Additionally, our demographic variables are limited to include the intersection of gender and sex, as well as our ethnicity and race variable. This population is limited due to groups of EMS professionals who identified as non-white being too small to make statistically reliable inferences. So with that, Dave, love to bring it back to you all and start discussing.
Love it, love it, love it. So off the bat, I think Carmen Elliott has one question, but let me just jump into length of test for a minute. Because it didn't surprise me about we've known from past projects, if you're listening and you haven't had a chance to look at strategies of high performing EMT and paramedic programs, that was a great study. Another great registry study was the longer you wait, the more you fail, right? So the distance between the time that you graduate to the time that you actually take the test, none of that surprised me, but length of test surprised me as a variable that you were looking at, because we know that computer adaptive testing will shut down if you're really terrible or really good, and then the longer you're there, the more you're sort of in the mid-range. So can you say a little bit about why length of test? What was that? Why were you digging in there?
Yeah, I'd love to. So that length of test, as people come and take a certification exam, you come in with a self-evaluation of how ready you are to take that exam. And so whenever you have that computer adaptive test like you talked about, sometimes that can allow candidates to start thinking more about the test than maybe the information that they are producing. So a candidate who is unsuccessful with the minimum number of questions may leave that examination attempt discouraged and not feeling like they were prepared, and that can have really unknown effects to different types of candidates. So that's one reason that we wanted to look into that. And we did see that those with that minimum test length had decreased odds of retesting. So we found that it was significant and that it does play some type of factor in that decision to retest.
Interesting. Now that needs a little more, digging, because I do know that, there was SAT studies that, particularly with people of color, where if you were asked a question early on, like, are you a person that's non-Caucasian, it affected your test score for the rest of the test versus asking it at the end. And so the initial exam items being difficult items may actually cause a psychological sort of chip in the brain to go, whoa, I'm not ready, I don't know this stuff, and the adaptation of that and the shutdown may cause some effect. Fascinating. I see Michael came on screen, so he has a question, I'm sure, or comment.
Jonathan, first, great research. I enjoyed reading this when I first saw it came out. Just awesome that we're looking at this topic. The nerd inside of me celebrated. The exciting part of this was when I was reading this, I found that test length to be one of the more interesting parts of this. I had a different take on it. In fact, I thought, gosh, we hear from students all the time, if I get to question 72 on the NREMT exam for EMT, I failed. And so I thought it was backwards. I was like, oh, great. Students who really probably could have passed are not retesting when they should be, as opposed to the students who have that psychological factor that, oh my gosh, I've made it to question 96, I must be failing this exam. They actually do turn around and retest at a higher odds ratio than the students who had a short test. So I saw it the other way around. We hear from students all the time, oh, I read on this blog post, I read on that blog post, and we dispel this myth that the more questions you get, the less likely you are to pass. So I thought that was great. I was like, well, some message is getting through by instructors and program directors that taking more test questions is not a bad thing and doesn't mean you're more likely to fail.
No, it's interesting that you bring that up because when I was looking at this initially, when Jonathan and I were talking about this, I was thinking about that student who walks out and says, hey, yeah, I finished really quick. This was great. I think I did awesome. And then you get the letter which says you failed. And that's gotta be discouraging, right? Because instantly you know that computer decided based off your performance really quickly that things are just not going well. Right. And so I think Michael, what you just said about the concept that a computer automated test responds to where you are, tries to test you at the point where you are, and try to find where you fall out in that 95% confidence interval. So going longer is not a bad thing. Sometimes you just need a little bit more time to figure out where you actually land. That's all it's really saying. Now, if you are that individual who is finished really early and you do get that I'm sorry, you were unsuccessful, gosh, that's probably a real strong emotional hit.
I love it.
I think that's the imperative part on our educators and our program directors out there to do some of that education, to say, don't freak out when you've made it to question 71. Keep testing, you're still in the game. I think that continues to be the job of us on the educational side, is to continue to remind students of some of the parameters that are in what a computer adaptive test is, because many of them have not taken it.
I love it, love it. And a quick reminder to our audience: if you see odds ratios, an odds ratio of 1 means more likelihood that you're a one by factor of 1 likelihood that they're actually going to retake the exam. So it's the less than 1 that are less likely to take the exam when you're looking at these tables. A question from Carmen Elliott here that I think is great. So is there any correlation between any of the NREMT regions and those states which may offer exams for certification and licensure? Meaning some students may seek registry for portability, but if they didn't pass, then maybe they settled for their state's exam in lieu of registry. And did you tease that out of your data?
That's a really good question as well. And we weren't able to tease that specific interaction out of our data because of our data source. It came from the National Registry's database. So those students who maybe weren't successful on that first exam and then pivoted to a different path to licensure weren't necessarily captured here.
Great. Fantastic. So another one, Kevin Kalapi, who submitted great research this year. You can come listen to him at the International Scientific Symposium in Atlanta. Great study. He says, no disclosure, no conflict. Very curious about the predictors of success as an employer who will support EMT and paramedic program attendance. Were you able to evaluate primary online versus live classroom courses?
Yeah, so our results here are purely associational. So we are not using this to predict success for any specific student with any specific demographics, but what we do want to do is allow program directors and educators to have the tools to say, on average, this population is more at risk than in another population. That way we can identify and give support that is necessary to help those students continue on and attain that certification and licensure. What that support looks like are the next steps. That's what we want to find out. We want to talk to those that specific population of individuals who were not successful and did not return, and figure out what it was that might have led to that, what it was that might have caused them to remain, so that we can have a healthy education system, which will lead to a healthy workforce, to go back to what you were speaking of earlier.
Yeah, I love this question. I mean, this is like the holy grail of educator questions, right? Can I go online? Can I go a little bit online? Can I go a mixed picture? And I think one of the biggest challenges, and we have talked about how do we address this question. So this is the fun part of our research team here at the registry. We sit around and throw ideas against the wall and try to answer for ourselves if we can actually legitimately answer a question. And this is one of those that we've thrown against the wall 4 or 5 times, beat ourselves up about it, and still walked away unsatisfied that we could get a good answer. And a lot of it's because we're such a mixed bag, right? If you go from one program to the next, some of these protocols will change, the curriculums will change from year to year, but also on top of that, we have different nuances in each of our programs. So the consistency is hard, and there's not a large database which really describes exactly what a program looks like, right? So me and Michael have talked about this to the point that we're like, hey, we should get a bunch of our buddies together and start actually getting a data set together where we have educational programs and we actually look at this question.
Yes. It is time for the Otstein criteria of educational programs, because it is multifactorial, just like cardiac arrest, and we do not have a good handle. We know that internships matter, that the level of training of the educator matters. We've seen studies on flipped methodology, online methodology, and any number of prep courses. These things matter, and I think if we're looking for a recipe for success, we need to keep iterating. So a question for you, by the way, I love Sahej is a brother. To me, I just, every time he makes a comment, I think, that was in my head. And he said the last comment is so meaningful and important, paraphrasing, the population identifying as non-white was too small to analyze. Yeah. We have a problem in that we don't have enough diversity, and interesting that it was too small. Now that's 2016, and my question is, perhaps you're going to repeat this with 2019, 2020, pre-COVID, post-COVID. Why 2016? And I think for researchers out there, budding researchers, our audience might think, that's old, but it takes a while to get the engine going, right? You have to get IRB approval. You have to really look at the methods. But why 2016? Why not 17 or 18? How did that happen?
So for us, we wanted to be able to answer a question completely. And so that required that we needed that 2-year window post graduating in 2016. So that pushed us into analyzing 2017, 2018, and then we get to where now we have to do the analysis. So this entire process, while it seems incredibly drawn out, was actually rather quick. We were able to get the information, process the information. The process of submitting and moving to publication, it takes time. And I realize that that is a criticism of academia, that is a criticism of research, and I understand that. But with that process, you get verified and defendable research. Yeah. I'm proud to be on this call with Ashish and with all of you to defend this research because I feel like it went through the appropriate process. And yes, that process took time, but it gives us these outcomes that I think that we can trust.
Love it, love it, love it. Fantastic. And I see that Michael and Bill Toon came on. Bill's probably talking to the little green men in his apartment there. But comments from Bill and from Michael, what are you thinking?
Are you sure you want to hear from me?
Oh, listen, I worried when I made you a panelist. I worried, but go
Hey,
ahead, go ahead. There's a
they
little
said it
helicopter
goes
above
from,
your head that must have good data. Go ahead.
So a couple of things that we've touched on already. The diversity in the National Registry is a known fact. When we did the EMT longitudinal demographic, we always were challenged trying to get that, that population large enough for us to be able to get some data. We had to do a lot of oversampling, and even with doing the oversampling, we still couldn't get to if you want to say, a large enough sample to draw meaningful conclusions. So I think it does speak about the workforce is really not as diverse as we would like to think it is, or we would like it to be. And so that, I think, is a total different approach that we have to deal with that. It would have been, and I know the study is over, but it would have really been nice if you were able to do almost an exit survey with those individuals who didn't complete, to really try to find out why, what was their motivation. So when I was a program director in Virginia, we did have a challenge getting EMT students to retest, and we were dealing with a large volunteer population. Not only was it challenging for us to get them to retest, in some cases, even if they retest and eventually pass, they didn't continue to volunteer. They just dropped out altogether. And we never, we didn't have the staff to be able to go dig into that, but we knew it was an issue. So one of the things that we tried to do to overcome that problem was make sure that before the class was finally over, we knew they were registered at a site to take the test even initially. Because we had trouble even getting them to go initially. Forget retesting. We even had trouble getting them to go initially to take the test.
Yeah, I've had similar struggles in the past. You want to have students go and test, you want to see them be successful, you want to see them use all of the tools that they've learned over the past either semester or maybe even year to 2 years of education. The reasons why that's happening, I think we go back to it's multifactorial, it's institutional. There's a lot out there that we don't know yet. And that's why I am passionate about this research, because without asking these questions and moving in that direction, we're never going to know the answer to that. And to kind of pivot and go back to something that Michael said earlier about myths that our EMS students see, that's another reason why this research and just research in general in EMS is absolutely important, because myths and ceremonies have a lot of power in our profession. Mm-hmm. And what we need to be able to do as leaders in the industry is have the myth right next to the data, have the myth right next to this is what's actually happening based off a nationally representative sample. And that's important to be able to have those students feel like the world is not ending when they get to question 73 or 74, because we've shown them the exact same types of statistical research that we do makes sense and it matters. So I think it kind of goes hand in hand by knowing as an institution that we have work to do and that we need to make sure that these myths and ceremonies that are running a lot of our thought processes are appropriately based in data.
I love it.
I love that. That's a great point. Just a couple, sorry, Dave. Just a quick couple things to go back to the diversity question, because this is something which this is those topics that grind your gears sometimes. We have to work on this. There's no question. Remley did a large study with our data from the registry looking at 10 years of data, and we are flatlined when it comes to diversity. Like there's some improvement, but gosh, we're flat.
Not even a shockable rhythm. We are.
Yes. Completely agree.
Do something.
And so for me, there's a couple of aspects here, because I want to bring that back to the research that we've done here. Because what Jonathan showed a little earlier is there's at-risk populations which are not retesting, right? So if we consider that our female population for paramedics are an at-risk population, that means somewhere along the way, we can provide support to increase diversity through a simple process of supporting that student to get back to the test.
Absolutely. So, and it dovetails into a couple of comments, one from Sahej, where the concept of how how are we supporting the student in getting to the exam, and where is the exam is one. I know, just to get at Bill's comment, there have been strategies, very successful strategies, of scheduling groups of students together. So instead of leaving it up to the student to schedule it sometime when they graduate, they do it in class together, and they go in groups so they can carpool, and if access to it or travel to it is an issue, as well as setting dates for retesting or rescheduling of the retest if needed. But even mock simulations, to the point that Ryan Scarborough is saying, the simulation of the testing environment. So, strip down, get your photo taken, get everything away, be in that pressure cooker so that when you arrive, you're not feeling like, oh, yeah, I'm on video, I'm a cheater, it's going to happen. I know in our experience, we had to simulate, it was a inner city class, and you had all the testing centers are in the suburbs, and a group of 10 to 15 kids of color, non-Caucasians, walking into a suburban testing center was like, what's happening? Why is that I'm being overrun by people who are not usually here? What is this thing? And the ability for that support, as you said, to be there to say, look, this is how it's going to go. Helping them adapt to computer testing, and I think all of those pieces, they're little chips in a bank that eventually build confidence and allow people to succeed. Love it. And here's another. There's tons of comments, and I'm happy trying to pick out the questions that they're here. So Dr. Heather Davis, who I wish I could unmute because your comment is great. So maybe I'll try and convince you to come on and actually say this comment. I'll just pick out Lori Sheldon's here. For the EMT level, was any data collected for the type of institution where the initial training took place, i.e. hospital, private, fire department, community college?
That's a really good question as well. We weren't necessarily able to get information about that student's type of college, type of educational experience, or the qualifications of the instructor that they might have had. As Ash alluded to earlier, education is very different across the United States, across the 50 states. So that type of confounding variable is something that we were not able to necessarily account for here. I really wish that we could have.
Not to say that Jonathan already hasn't half his schemes of actually getting this data and putting this data set together and is already planning it.
I don't like limitations.
Yeah, so I think this is a great question, because the big thing about research is you do the first question, find out all the things that you wish you could do better, and then go do it. And that's where we're at. So yes, you will probably see data like this in the near future.
Love it, love it. Kim came on, which means she's got something to say, and she's done research in this area. So welcome. Kim's a board member for Registry and for PCRF, and talk to us. What's happening in Missouri today?
It's hot. Well, congratulations, Jonathan and Ash, for a great paper. Really important to the industry, I think. I just want to reemphasize what you said earlier, that the registry is very instrumental in getting data. And when I did my dissertation, I actually did a similar study, but I did not exclude the military. And I think it really colored my results in a way, because that population is so unique. And so as soon as I saw your paper, I was like, oh, dang it. I wish I had done that, but I really think this is hugely important. So I did have a question about payer status, because I know that can really be a barrier to some students, especially, in some marginalized populations. And I was wondering why you elected not to look at that variable.
I wish that would be an election choice. So of course we're using the National Registry's data set, right? And so we're looking at that data. So it's not a complete data set on who is paying for what and things like that, right? And so that's not a variable we had. Now, as you think about the future of what you can do with state-based data sets, right? So Virginia, all these different states who have lots of detailed data about who's paying, how is it happening, things like that. I think those may be better data sets to actually look at some of those questions.
Yeah, I didn't even realize, that hadn't even occurred to me when I was talking to Remley, as I was getting my data. She said that, in some states, the state pays for it.
Yes.
Or, and of course, in some places, academy style programs, the academy pays for it. And I thought, well, dang, that could really make a difference for some students. They're just trying to scrape together their last nickel to pay for the first test, much less to be able to do a second exam. So, that definitely could be a barrier for some folks as well.
Well, and additionally, Kim, there's states where anyone can apply to be in a program and get accepted in the program, right?
True.
So that also makes a challenge for, like, if you're a program director, what does that mean for pass rates and things like that, right? So how do you look at this population, which may be so heterogeneous when it comes to what they're bringing to the table, and as an educator, how do you get them ready? Because that is such a challenging perspective versus a more homogenous, like, if I take a bunch of medical students and say, hey, I'm going to teach you an EMT course, these people are very driven, right? So there's a little different dynamic.
Well, and I also, I think we need to do a little bit better job. In North Carolina, I know, no conflict here. They had pre-EMT prep courses. I know at UCLA, where I declare conflict, we do have that kind of a let's get you spun up on medical terminology or math or scientific inquiry, but doing some of that work with pre-entrance exams, and I'll declare full conflict with a vendor that does that kind of thing. So you have to, I think, begin to kind of go, what are those factors? And money is definitely part of it. I like Ryan's comment about, well, maybe it's just that we just don't pay anybody enough, and they go off to fire and police, but we're flatlining because the pay and benefits are the issue. Hold on, Bill, because I got Dr. Davis to actually unmute herself, and so Heather, if you're there, can you make your comment and question? Oh, there you are. Oh, we can't hear you though. You're muted. We see you and we cannot hear you. So it might be a selection of microphone on the GoToWebinar platform. Bill, go ahead, and Heather will work on her mic.
So, one of the things I think, and I've shared this with you before, and this may offend some people, which
Bill,
won't stop.
no.
Well, I think EMS is done on the cheap. Programs are run with the least number of personnel, the most number of students that you can cram in there. So it would be wonderful if every program could offer a pre-program or could coordinate things at the end to get everyone to the same site. But I had when I was working in Virginia, I thought I had a good sized staff, but they were stretched thin. And, I had 5 people that worked for me, and yet we still couldn't do those kinds of things. And compared to other healthcare professions, and I bet you anyone that's at the collegiate level, if you look at the number of FTEs that are in the nursing program or respiratory therapy or something else compared to what's in EMS, they outdo us, yet we are expected to have huge classes and huge turnout, and it's just EMS is done, education is done cheaply.
We're expected to produce graduates who are ready to work right away because we really don't know what the credentialing, both medical direction and operational credentialing, is like. So people expect that you're going to graduate and you'll be ready, which is a challenge for the profession. So the exam has to be robust enough to say you're minimally qualified to do this. And yet there's operational issues that educators just don't even get into. It's very concerning. Sahej is making a comment here about, I'd love to see an option for training programs to pay for the exam. I think that's actually possible. So you can actually roll it into your fees and make sure that it's already in your initial attempt as part of it. So I'm thinking that yeah, that is definitely possible. And Heather did clear her.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Go for it.
Okay, great. Well, my comment is going to be about improving efficacy, but before that, related to the payer issues, one of the things that we did when I was still at UCLA was we had a donor who wanted to create a scholarship and said, how can we help? And so we asked learners who had graduated the program what would be most useful. And they said, you know, it's at the end of the program when I'm totally broke. It was really lovely to have money at the beginning. I needed it for fees and books and tuition, but I was eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and ramen and actually had to wait many months to to go back to work in fast food or somewhere else before I could take the test and get my license to start working in this career. And the donor was flabbergasted that that was happening. And so when they created that scholarship, that donor in particular created that funds to be dispersed at the end of the program so that the graduates would have the money right in the nick of time for when they needed it for licensing and certification fees for the exam fees. Because when you take, many places have to pay for the practical and the cognitive exam, etc. So just an idea. But my comment was about one, addressing for those who may experience stereotype threat, ensuring that we don't use language around it's easy, don't worry, it's going to be fine, because then when learners start to take the exam and it feels hard, sometimes the messaging to themselves is, uh-oh, they said this was easy, this does not feel easy, I must be stupid, I don't belong here, I'm going to fail this test. And so we don't want to get in that cycle of negative self-talk. The messaging from you as an educator can be, it is challenging, you're ready, you are prepared, and you have done hard things before. It's to remind them of their mastery experience, what tests in your program have been really challenging, remind them of those successes. It does a better job of addressing stereotype threat than just saying it's easy, don't worry about it. And then another idea I wanted to share was about normalizing failure well before there's a failure that occurs, to perhaps invite folks back who have failed at some point, who have failed the registry exam or some other licensing exam or large test in your program, maybe failed their first attempt at the fire academy if you're in a fire-based system, and that's important. But things that matter to your learners, these big monumental events in an EMS career, and to talk about how they adjusted strategies and how they recovered from that failure, and how the school in particular was there to support and correct, again, focused on strategy, not ability, and to all throughout the course to be thinking about it's okay to talk about it, don't be shameful about a failure, and to just get right back up there and recover.
Right. And I think you've hit the nail on the head, because I think people take a lot of easy tests during their EMT and paramedic classes, and they just don't learn how to fail, failure equals success, right? So maybe resilience is the wrong term, maybe grit and perseverance. And this concept that even when you don't have the result that you wanted, that you can come back to it. There is, I think, a sense of you passed, you failed, and it's a psychological hurdle that if we get used to fail, we can go, no, this is totally normal, I can retake this test. And I see that I have canine approval on the part of Bill. I hate to monopolize this. I'm seeing lots of great comments here from folks, and Kevin Kalapi from North Carolina says the observations on out of class job readiness are spot on. Our hospital nurses get 3 to 6 months of training and mentoring before they take on patient load, and our local EMS systems struggle to get 4 weeks as a third person. Kyle says,
just to go back to what he just said, that is such a great statement. We're the only field that you would ever think about putting somebody on the line of fire without a journeyman type of status or something. I mean, I am fortunate as a physician that I had people mentoring me along the way so that I don't screw up. And I mean, let's be honest.
And it was a formalized process, right, that got you academic credit. We think of ride-alongs and hospital clinicals and all of those preceptors as informal education that is not really credited. And if we formalize that, if we micro-credential that system by which we can get folks little by little to build those skills, then we might actually be looking at a much different model in terms of residencies, internships, and how that fits into an active duty status versus a theoretical learning status.
And right now it's on the medical directors, right? So from me as a medical director, my credentialing process for my people is we have an onboarding system. And you have 6 months that we help you, we train you, navigation, SOPs, all that kind of stuff. It's all tied into it, right? So we accept that that's part of the reality is that people need to be mentored. So the question is, where do you fall?
You know, Dave, it's only going to happen when you start paying those people, because I'm convinced that you can't keep asking people to do it just as part of their job, because they're busy people. And again, this goes back to EMS is done on the cheap.
And I see Michael. Michael, you've been, I think, itching to jump in. Did you have a rebuttal to EMS is done on the cheap? I see that nice tie that you're wearing today. Did that suit get paid for by your EMT salary, or?
Everything in my life is paid for by my EMT salary, Dave. If you're willing to make a donation to the Help Michael Caduce Fund, I'm willing to take donations. We're a 501(c). I have a question. I would second everything Heather Davis said. We actually have a sheet we give to all the students to go test, and it literally says after the exam, go sit in your car for 10 minutes because you're going to feel like you failed. And breathe. Turn your phone off, turn the radio off, just sit there and breathe for 10 minutes and get yourself back in your right mind. But we're preparing them to think it's tough and that they're going to fail, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that helps our students. But if a student fails the first attempt, there's a gap there right before they can schedule their reattempt. That it's 10 or 14 days. Do you think that plays a role in discouraging students from retaking? I know the objective is that they should go back to their program and get some remediation and some training, which is great. But unless I'm pulling their report every day, I don't know that they failed unless they do actively take a role in reaching back out to me. Do you think that gap where they can't do anything discourages them from retesting?
I think that's something that we should definitely look at. What we're hoping to see here is that if you have a candidate who comes back with that minimum number of questions, then they're going to get that report, and they're not necessarily going to know what it is they need to focus on. And so that time anecdotally is used to allow them to look at that report, figure out what they need to focus on, and then come back prepared to pass on their second attempt. What we're seeing here is that those that have the minimum number of questions don't tend to come back or have less odds of coming back. And so there might be an intersection between the paramedic program or the EMT program, that program director, and understanding that report and having a strategy to come back that second time. So whether or not that window has a positive or a negative effect, we don't necessarily know that. But our results from this paper help us see that there's definitely something that we can do during that window to help these people at risk of not coming back feel confident enough to come back and remain in the profession.
Great point. A question from Chuck Farrell here. How do you address all the bad word of mouth that students who fail give each other? They pass it along to fellow students or prospective students, and it's sort of that concept that I think it was 16 people were traced back to being the ones that said on social media vaccines don't work, and then from that, they could trace all of the misinformation back to 16 humans. How do you deal with that misinformation that gets just spewed? And I have some ideas, but what are yours?
So just a few thoughts. I think it goes back to myths and ceremonies associated with EMS. It's easy for a student who is moving towards an exam or taking an exam to say that that exam might have been the issue with what happened. what the registry can do is provide the evidence that we are a psychometrically sound exam, that we study extensively how to put on a proper certification exam, and then we provide that access. And we're very transparent about it. We work with a number of organizations that know our processes, that are stakeholders within our board, and it is a uniform process that is open from the beginning to the end. So we need to be able to dispel the myths and ceremonies about the registry being some kind of gigantic mountain to overcome, whenever it is exactly as you mentioned earlier. It's a competency test. It's to see that you are prepared to go out.
Minimal, right? Yeah. And isn't that a cultural problem with educators who set bars that are lower than registry, and then they're wondering, why does it people fail? It's a culture of success, right? Bill's itching to say something. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm there now. I think that one of the things that would help dispel some of this stuff is many instructors in the program and the program directors and even the medical directors have never taken the computer adapted exam.
And the educators, yes, they took the paper test long ago, and then they never took the computer adaptive. Yes.
Yeah, and I renew by exam, so I do it every 2 years. So I'm sorry, for those that are qualified and experienced, they shouldn't be scared. Their knowledge is there to pass that minimally competent exam, but it would give them that experience. Okay, when you go in to this testing center, here's what you can expect. Here's how all the steps that they just don't get to appreciate because they've not done it, and they can't tell them firsthand what to expect. And I do think that everything you said about the stakeholders, that about the National Registry, that information does not get down to that frontline class, the people that are taking it. They don't understand any of that because I think in some cases, peers, colleagues, friends, you don't understand the process, so how can you share it with them? And those are the people that are sitting there in the classroom that I personally feel are also the spreaders of the myth.
I agree. They're super spreaders, actually. They're super spreaders. Let's just mix in the COVID stuff. So one worry, though, I see you, I agree with you, I raise you. Here's where I raise you. There are a small percentage of those educators who will go take that test and will experience an adaptive test that increases their difficulty. They're getting a different exam than their students are. And they will come away with a anger or a hatred or a fear that in fact their students are going to go through this really tough test because they were answering question after question correctly. So it does come with a little bit of a price tag. I agree with you. I'm going to say go take it, go experience it. Just be aware that it's adapting to difficulty, and that part of it may play a psychological role on the educators who do return and go, there's no way to do it. Until we get good measurements for folks to actually get that bar up where the registry really is just a walk in the park, then we will experience this continual feeling like it's this big black hole of misinformation, and it's so hard. It's so hard.
But you know, we do. Thing, going back to what you said originally, David, a lot of culture, right? We need a culture of success, right? So we need to inspire people from the program level all the way up to medical directors that this may be hard, but you can be successful. Going back to what Heather said earlier, it is a culture of success that we need to inspire, right? And so when you do have these super spreaders, that information about the success pieces, because we know way over 70% are successful. We have 70%, like greater than 70% first time pass rates, right? So we know that there's people who are out successful. They have to tell their story. That's the story we need to hear.
Yeah. And I think we need to compare it to some other healthcare professions about what their first time pass rate is for nursing and respiratory care. And are we equal? Are we better? Or we don't do as well, you know, with the other healthcare professionals that we're working with. But Dave, I'm going to go back and challenge you. There's not a single instructor or program director that shouldn't be able to take that exam and pass it with no trouble and not think it's hard. If they do, then they should be
It's
maybe
not that they won't pass it.
reevaluating themselves, because
Agreed.
I find it, I'm sorry, National Registry, it's easy.
And that, I think, is the difference between confident kind of approaches that say I am a competent person, because I think they will pass it, but it's a fear and it's a misunderstanding of there's 4 choices and we're looking for the best choice, not the only choice, the exact right choice. So that question about best versus correct is a problem, and they're not used to configuring items like that. So I think educators can do a lot of good if they jump on and volunteer for the registry to go write questions. And particularly become EMS fellows, because there's an open EMS fellow position, so we can study this more. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? What does that entail? You get a PhD and it gets paid for. What is that fellowship?
So real quick, yeah. So we take street providers and we help them become PhDs and able to do EMS research in the future. And that's where it starts. So take a look. Our advertisement's up right now. We are actively recruiting. This is one of the missions of the National Registry, is to arm our nation with researchers who are willing to do EMS research. You could do it in education, you could do it in clinical affairs, but this is one of the major goals of the National Registry, is to set ourselves up for success. We've had a bunch of amazing fellows which have come through. We would love for you to join us.
Love it. Love it.
And it's much better when someone else pays for your doctorate, because I'll be 86 when I finish paying mine off.
It's completely paid for.
Well, I hope it's than that, but all right. Well, lots of great comments here for our panelists. I just want to thank the National Registry again, but Ash in particular and Jonathan for coming on. Rebecca Cash was in the audience. I kept trying to get her to unmute to make a comment, but she was shy today. She was letting Jonathan take the spotlight here. And thank you for the kind words in the question and answer area, in the chat area. Lots of ideas. Unfortunately, this podcast has to come to an end, and we are in that moment of finishing today. We want to remind you that during this abrupt end, we're still with you every month. There's a clinical podcast on the second Monday of the month that Dr. Remily Crow and Dr. Tony Fernandez manage. We also want to have you join us at the next education research podcast on September 24th, 10 a.m. Pacific, noon Central. The opinions expressed at this great event are those of the presenters and not necessarily of the organizations they represent. And we also want to let you know that the International Scientific Symposium at EMS World Expo is well on track. We have 42 abstracts to present, and there will be a phenomenal, I think, outpour of interesting research there. So please tune in, go to the PCRF website, prehospitalcare.org, and thank you for joining us today.